Graduation day is meant to be a moment of triumph. It's the day you've been working towards for years, the culmination of countless sleepless nights, exams, and essays. You walk across the stage, receive your diploma, and the world cheers for you. Family, friends, mentors, they're all there, celebrating your success. But what happens after the ceremony ends and the confetti settles? What would you do if, after everything, you suddenly found yourself completely alone, with no clear direction and no one beside you? That was the reality Emily had to face. As she sat on the steps outside her university campus, watching the groups of students gather for photos, laughing, and sharing stories about their plans for the future, Emily couldn't shake the overwhelming sense of emptiness that weighed heavily on her chest. She was alone. Her family wasn't there, no congratulatory hug from a mother, no proud smile from a father. She didn't even have a group of friends to hang out with. Emily had always kept to herself, focusing on her studies rather than socializing. Now she was a graduate, but she couldn't help but feel like she was on the outside looking in. "Shouldn't I feel happy?" she thought, staring at her diploma in her hand. She had worked so hard for this moment, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a goodbye to a chapter in her life she hadn't even fully lived. The thought of what came next was paralyzing. The future, once a source of excitement and anticipation, now seemed like a void, an endless road stretching out before her with no map to guide her. "What now?" she muttered under her breath, more to herself than anyone else. The world around her continued to buzz with excitement, but she felt disconnected from it all. Her classmates chatted eagerly about their next steps, new jobs, internships, travel plans. Yet, Emily couldn't bring herself to share in the conversation. The reality was she didn't have a plan. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her out of her thoughts. A text from her aunt, who had raised her after her parents passed away, popped up. "I'm so proud of you, Emily. Can't wait to see you soon. I'm sure you're going to do great things." A bittersweet smile tugged at Emily's lips. She missed her aunt more than anything, but at the same time, her aunt's message made her feel even more alone. It was a reminder of everything she didn't have: a family to celebrate with, a group of friends to laugh with, a community to be a part of. The sound of her phone buzzing again interrupted her thoughts. This time, it was a message from an old friend, someone she hadn't spoken to in months. The message was short and to the point. "Hey Emily, I know we haven't talked in a while, but I just wanted to say congratulations on graduating. I hope everything's going great for you." Another message that made her feel even more isolated. Emily was used to being alone, but now that everyone seemed to be moving forward, she couldn't help but wonder why she felt like she was stuck in place. It was a harsh reality to face. Everyone around her seemed to be on the next step of their journey, while she was left standing still, unsure of what came next. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The voice on the video playing in the background said, almost as if it were speaking directly to her. Emily glanced up, startled by the coincidence. The video, posted by someone she didn't even know, had asked the very question she had been struggling with for hours. What pushes you forward, even when things get tough? For a moment, Emily was still. She thought about her past. Her years of working tirelessly to get good grades, to make sure her aunt was proud of her, to succeed despite the odds stacked against her. That was what had always pushed her forward, a desire to prove she could make it, even when everything seemed uncertain. But now, at this very moment, Emily had no answers. She had no idea where to go from here. She stood up from the steps, tucking her diploma under her arm. The wind had started to pick up, rustling the leaves around her, and a cold shiver ran down her spine. The campus felt so different now, empty, as if everyone had already moved on while she was still stuck in place. Emily took one last glance at the crowd of students, now drifting off to their various destinations. There was a bittersweet finality to the scene, as if the chapter of her college years was closing before she was ready to say goodbye. She felt a deep sense of longing, a desire for something more, something meaningful that would give her a sense of direction. But where could she find that meaning? And how would she ever move forward when she was so unsure of herself? Maybe tomorrow will be better, she thought, walking slowly toward the campus exit. The uncertainty about the future gnawed at her, but there was still a flicker of hope inside her. Maybe the answers would come in time. Maybe she just needed to keep pushing forward. But for now, Emily was left with one burning question. What would she do now, when it felt like everything around her was falling apart? Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Emily had always been a quiet, introspective person, someone who found solace in the pages of books and the quiet hum of the library. She didn't quite fit the typical college student mold, at least, not the one that her peers seemed to embrace. Where they found comfort in late-night parties, group hangouts, and spontaneous adventures, Emily found her refuge in studying, organizing her notes, and making sure she never missed an assignment deadline. While others formed lasting friendships and built their social networks, Emily kept to herself. She didn't mind it at first. After all, she had always been this way. But now, sitting alone after graduation, the weight of her isolation felt heavier than ever. Growing up, Emily didn't have much of a chance to be carefree. Her parents had passed away when she was young, just 8 years old. A tragic car accident that took both of them. After the accident, Emily was sent to live with her Aunt Linda, her mother's sister, who stepped in and took responsibility for raising her. Aunt Linda had always been a rock for Emily, a steady presence in her otherwise chaotic world. While most children her age had the luxury of bonding with both parents, Emily only had memories of her mother's warm smile and her father's laugh. Those memories felt like fragments now, slipping away with each passing year. Aunt Linda did her best to fill the void, but no one could replace the love of a mother and father. Despite the best efforts of her aunt, Emily always felt like she was missing something, as if a part of her was never truly whole. Aunt Linda worked as a school teacher, and she poured herself into her job. As a result, Emily spent a lot of time on her own, learning how to take care of herself at an early age. While other kids were playing outside, Emily was reading or learning how to cook simple meals. She was often content with her own company, as her introverted nature made it easy to settle into her routines. But as Emily grew older, the silence began to feel like a heavy burden. She longed for connection, for someone to talk to who truly understood her. Yet, as she entered high school and later, college, Emily found it hard to make those connections. She never quite felt like she belonged. She was intelligent, but she wasn't the outgoing type. She knew how to keep her grades up and how to get things done, but she didn't know how to break through the walls she'd built around herself. It wasn't that she didn't want friends. She did. She just didn't know how to start. So, she kept her distance, pouring herself into her studies instead. Her professors admired her diligence, but her classmates barely knew her beyond her academic achievements. Emily couldn't help but feel like an outsider in a world that valued connection above all else. But the one constant in her life, the one person who never left her side, was Aunt Linda. The bond they shared was the one Emily could always rely on. Linda was more than just a guardian, she was Emily's anchor. She taught her how to be strong, how to handle adversity, and how to keep moving forward even when life seemed unfair. "You're going to do great things," Emily, Aunt Linda would always say. "You've got a heart full of potential. All you need is a little patience." It was Aunt Linda's belief in her that kept Emily going throughout college. Even when she felt like giving up, she could hear her aunt's voice in her head, urging her on. Emily often wondered what her life would have been like if her parents had survived. Would they have been the ones to push her forward, or would they have been just as absent as everyone else? It was a question Emily had wrestled with over the years, but she never quite found an answer. But things changed when Aunt Linda passed away 2 years ago. Emily was devastated. The one person who had always been there for her, the one person who had believed in her when no one else seemed to, was gone. The grief of losing her aunt left Emily adrift, unsure of who she was without that guiding light in her life. Her aunt's death was a turning point, and Emily found herself facing the harsh reality of life alone. She had no one left who knew her story, no one who could remind her of the person she was meant to become. Emily struggled with her grief during her time at university. She poured herself into her studies even more, using her work as a distraction. But despite her academic success, she felt empty inside. Every time she walked across the campus, the absence of her aunt felt like an open wound. Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something, someone who could help her navigate the chaos of her emotions. At times, Emily would think back to the conversations she and Aunt Linda had shared. She could still hear her aunt's voice in her mind, offering words of comfort. "You'll find your way, Emily. You just need to trust yourself." But the truth was, Emily didn't trust herself. She didn't know what to do now that the one person who had given her that sense of direction was no longer there. She had no one to turn to, and no one to lean on for advice or reassurance. It was on graduation day that the weight of all of this finally hit her. As she sat there alone on the steps of the campus, holding her diploma in her hands, Emily realized that she had been living her entire life with an invisible anchor, her aunt. And now, that anchor was gone. The realization stung, and for the first time in years, Emily felt truly lost. She couldn't help but wonder if Aunt Linda had been right all along. Maybe all she needed was a little patience. But how could she have patience when everything in her life felt like it was falling apart? Emily stood up, looking around at the empty campus. The wind had picked up, and the chilly air made her shiver. The world seemed to keep moving, but Emily felt like she was standing still, waiting for something to change. She didn't know where to go from here, but she couldn't help but wonder, was there more to life than just surviving? Maybe it was time to take a step forward. Maybe it was time to stop living in the shadow of her past and start building a future. But could she do it? And if so, how? The days following graduation were a blur for Emily. She spent most of her time in her small apartment, staring out the window, unsure of what to do next. It wasn't that she hadn't thought about her future, she had. But now that the day was finally here, she found herself overwhelmed by the uncertainty that lay ahead. Her phone buzzed again with another message. This time, it was from her cousin, Josh, who had always been more of a free spirit. They weren't particularly close, but their families were connected, and Josh had always been the outgoing type, the one who was quick to make friends and build connections. "Hey, congrats on graduating. I know you're probably figuring things out, but if you want, I can introduce you to some people I know who are hiring. I bet you'd be perfect for something in the city. Let me know." Emily stared at the message, reading it over and over again. It was kind of Josh to offer help, but the idea of moving to the city, jumping into something so foreign to her, was intimidating. She had always played it safe, and the thought of starting over in a bustling metropolis filled her with anxiety. It was easier to stay in the comfort of her own space, to keep the status quo, but that wouldn't help her grow. She knew that. For the past few weeks, Emily had been searching for job opportunities, but nothing had felt right. She applied to positions that seemed promising. Administrative jobs, research assistant roles, even a few in customer service, but none of them sparked excitement. They all felt like a way to fill the time, to keep the routine going, but they didn't offer the change she so desperately craved. But it wasn't just the job search that weighed on her. Emily had been battling a deep, internal conflict. She had spent her entire life focusing on what was practical and safe. Her academic success was proof of that. But now that the safety net of school was gone, She felt lost, uncertain about the path she should take. Was it enough to follow the traditional route, to take a job and try to make a life for herself? Or should she take a risk, follow a passion she didn't quite understand yet, and see where it led? Her mind kept racing, and it felt like every option was equally terrifying. And to make matters worse, her loneliness seemed to amplify the uncertainty. Even as she scrolled through social media, seeing everyone else post their graduation pictures and new job announcements, she felt even more isolated. She was happy for them, of course, but their success only highlighted her lack of direction. "Why can't I figure this out?" Emily whispered to herself one evening, as the weight of her thoughts threatened to consume her. "Everyone else seems to have it all together. Why can't I?" It was then that Emily heard a knock on her door. She wasn't expecting anyone. Hesitant, she walked to the door and opened it, only to find the one person she hadn't expected, Mrs. Patterson, the principal from her high school. "Emily." Mrs. Patterson greeted with a warm smile, her eyes twinkling behind her glasses. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." Emily blinked, surprised. "Mrs. Patterson? What are you doing here?" The older woman stepped forward, handing her a small potted plant. "I thought I'd come by to congratulate you in person. I know it's been a while since we last spoke, but I saw your name in the alumni newsletter and wanted to see how you were doing. You're such a bright young woman, Emily. I knew you'd make it far." The sudden gesture of kindness took Emily off guard. Mrs. Patterson had always been a kind but distant figure in her life, an authority figure, someone who always expected excellence, but never really knew what it was like to walk in Emily's shoes. And yet, standing before her now, Emily felt a strange sense of comfort. "Thank you," Emily replied, her voice catching slightly. She wasn't sure how to react. "That's really nice of you." "Of course," Mrs. Patterson said, stepping inside when Emily moved aside to let her in. "I wanted to talk to you about something. I know you've been through a lot, and I know that figuring out what comes next can be daunting. But I also know that you have something special inside you, something that a lot of people never discover. And I believe you have the ability to create your own path. It's just a matter of believing in yourself." Emily swallowed, her chest tight as she listened to Mrs. Patterson's words. She had never been one to open up about her struggles, but there was something about this moment, this unexpected visit, that made her want to spill everything. She wanted to tell Mrs. Patterson how scared she was, how lost she felt, how difficult it was to find the courage to take that first step into the unknown. But instead of speaking her mind, Emily simply nodded. "I don't know if I'm ready," she whispered. "I feel like everyone else has a plan, and I'm just here." Mrs. Patterson looked at her thoughtfully, then placed a hand on her shoulder. "Sometimes, it's okay not to have all the answers. The important thing is to start moving, even if it's just a small step. You don't have to know everything right away, but you do have to trust that you have the strength to figure it out along the way." Her words felt like a balm to Emily's raw nerves. For the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of clarity, a spark of hope. Maybe she didn't have to have it all figured out. Maybe taking one small step forward was enough for now. Mrs. Patterson smiled, sensing the shift in Emily's mood. "I'm proud of you, Emily. You've come so far, and I have no doubt that you'll continue to do great things." With that, she turned and walked out the door, leaving Emily standing there, holding the small plant in her hands. It wasn't much, but it felt like a sign. A small but significant gesture. And in that moment, Emily knew that she had to start somewhere, anywhere. She couldn't stay stuck in the limbo of uncertainty forever. The next day, Emily decided to call Josh. She wasn't sure if she was ready to take a leap into the unknown, but she knew one thing for sure. It was time to start moving forward, even if it meant taking a risk. The sun had barely risen when Emily picked up her phone and dialed Josh's number. Her hands shook as she waited for the call to connect, her heart pounding in her chest. She'd been sitting at her desk for nearly an hour, debating whether or not to follow through with her decision. It was crazy, right? She had barely started to figure out what to do with her life, and now she was about to make a major change. One that could either lift her up or push her further into uncertainty. Josh's voice broke through her thoughts when he answered. Hey, you okay? You sound like you've got a lot on your mind. I do, Emily replied, her voice trembling. I've been thinking a lot, and I think I'm ready to take that step. If the offer is still on the table, I'd like to hear more about those job opportunities in the city. A pause. Then, Josh's voice cracked with enthusiasm. Of course, absolutely. I knew you'd come around. I've got a few people I can connect you with, trust me, you'll be perfect for it. I'll send you the details, and we'll figure out a time for you to come down. It'll be a fresh start, Emily. I can feel it. Her heart skipped a beat. For the first time in weeks, Emily felt like she was moving, like she wasn't just watching life pass her by. This wasn't the solution to everything, but it was a start. And she needed that. She had spent so long waiting for the right moment to make a change, but there was no perfect time. There was only now. Emily hung up, her mind still spinning, but a strange sense of determination filling her chest. This was it. The next few days were a whirlwind of packing, planning, and saying goodbye to her old life. Emily couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and fear as she prepared for the move. There was so much she didn't know, so much she wasn't sure of. She had never lived in the city before, and the thought of leaving the small town where she'd spent most of her life made her feel like she was walking into a vast unknown. But for the first time in a long while, Emily felt like she was making a choice for herself. Not because it was easy, but because she had to try something new, even if it terrified her. The morning of her departure, Emily stood in her now empty apartment, looking around at the place that had been her sanctuary for so long. It had always felt safe, a little cocoon where she could hide away from the world. But now it felt like a cage. She was ready for something different. Her aunt's words echoed in her mind. You've got a heart full of potential. All you need is a little patience. Emily closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. She had come so far through the pain, the loneliness, and the fear. And now she was taking the first step into a future that was wide open. She wasn't sure what awaited her in the city, but for the first time in a long while, she was willing to face it head-on. As Emily boarded the bus to the city, the weight of the decision felt heavier than ever. She had never been so far from home, and the bus ride seemed endless. The landscapes outside the window blurred, one after another, as the miles between her and her past stretched on. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking into a storm. The city was huge, unforgiving, full of people who seemed to know exactly where they were going. They had goals. They had purpose. Emily wasn't sure if she had either of those things. The bus pulled into the city, and Emily stepped off, feeling both small and enormous at the same time. She looked around at the towering buildings, the bustling streets, the constant hum of life. It was overwhelming, to say the least. Hey, over here. Josh waved from the sidewalk, grinning ear to ear. Emily blinked, her chest tightening as she approached him. He had already made the transition to city life seem so effortless, so natural. But as Emily stood there next to him, she felt like she was suddenly the odd one out. You ready for this? Josh asked with a broad smile. You're going to love it here. The city has a way of opening up possibilities. Emily nodded slowly, but the nervousness that gripped her heart was impossible to ignore. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to feel as confident as he seemed, but doubt crept in. What if this was a mistake? What if she wasn't cut out for city life? Josh clapped her on the back, giving her a reassuring grin. Let's get you settled in. The adventure starts now. That night, after Emily had unpacked her few belongings in the small apartment Josh had found for her, she stood by the window, staring out at the glowing city below. The lights seemed endless, stretching far beyond her vision. The city was alive, buzzing with energy. And yet, she felt small in it, a drop in an ocean. A knock on her door broke the silence, and Emily jumped, startled. She opened it to find Josh standing there, holding a bag of takeout. "I thought you might be hungry," he said, grinning. "Welcome to the city, Emily. This is just the beginning." For a moment, Emily didn't say anything. She was still processing the enormity of the change, the uncertainty that weighed on her chest. But then she forced a smile. "Thanks, Josh. I think I'm going to need a lot of time to adjust." "Take your time," he said, sitting down at the small table. "This place has a way of growing on you. And hey, if you ever need a hand or someone to talk to, you've got me. We're in this together." The kindness in Josh's voice made her feel a little less alone, even though she knew the road ahead would still be long. But for now, Emily felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this wasn't the easy route. Maybe this wasn't going to be the smooth transition she had hoped for. But one thing was clear: she had taken the first step. And sometimes, that's all it takes to start a journey. The city wasn't as unforgiving as Emily had feared, but it wasn't exactly welcoming either. For the first few weeks, she felt like a ghost walking through its bustling streets. The noise, the constant rush of people, the towering buildings, they all felt like obstacles she had to navigate just to get through the day. Josh had been kind, showing her around and introducing her to some of his friends, but Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't belong. The people in the city were confident, assertive, moving with purpose. She felt like an outsider, still trying to figure out where she fit into the whole picture. Every day, she applied for jobs, but it felt like the same cycle: applications sent, rejection emails returned. She couldn't help but feel discouraged. Was she just not cut out for this life? She had dreamed of escaping the small town, but now that she was here, she realized just how different everything was. It wasn't easier, it was just different. And for the first time in a long time, Emily felt uncertain about everything. It was a Friday afternoon when she finally got an email that made her heart skip a beat. The subject line read, "Job offer, research assistant position." She opened it quickly, hoping that it was what she had been waiting for. Her eyes scanned the message, and a sense of relief washed over her. The job offer was from one of the institutions she had applied to months ago, and it was the kind of position she'd always dreamed of: challenging, fulfilling, and a perfect fit for her skills. The salary wasn't what she had hoped for, but it was a start. She could make it work. She felt a surge of excitement as she read through the details. Finally, something was going right. But as she clicked reply to accept the offer, something caught her eye: a name at the bottom of the email, Mr. Marcus West. The name rang a bell, though she couldn't quite place it. It wasn't until that evening when she was grabbing a coffee with Josh that the memory finally clicked. Marcus West. She had met him months ago, during her final year of university, at a career fair. He had been one of the representatives from the institution that had just offered her the job. At the time, she had been too shy to engage much, but Marcus had been kind, listening to her ramble on about her aspirations and offering encouragement. He had made a lasting impression on her, but she hadn't expected to see him again, let alone be offered a position at his institution. "Wait, you mean Marcus West?" Josh asked when she mentioned the name. "The one who gave the speech at the career fair? He's one of the senior researchers at the institution. I hear he's a tough guy to impress." Emily nodded slowly, her mind spinning. Could it really be him? "Yeah," Josh said, taking a sip of his coffee. "He's kind of a big deal in that field. You'll be working directly with him if you take that position. He's got a reputation for being a little intense, though." Emily's stomach tightened. She hadn't expected to be working with someone like Marcus. She didn't know much about him beyond their brief encounter, but the idea of being under the direct supervision of someone so accomplished made her feel both exhilarated and terrified. Could she measure up? Would he be disappointed with her like so many others had been? As the evening went on, Emily's excitement about the job offer began to feel more like anxiety. What if she wasn't good enough? She had spent her whole life trying to avoid disappointment, but now it felt like the pressure was intensifying. The next day, she sat in her apartment, staring at the job offer again. Could she do this? Could she really start over in a city full of strangers, working under someone like Marcus West? She took a deep breath and decided to call her aunt's voicemail, something she hadn't done in weeks. It was silly, she knew, but in that moment, she needed to hear a familiar voice. "Hi, Aunt Linda. It's Emily. I don't know what to do. I got an offer, but it's more than I expected. I guess I'm just scared. I don't want to fail again. I don't know if I'm ready, but I don't want to stay stuck either. I wish you were here." Her eyes stung with tears as she listened to the voicemail, her aunt's warm, encouraging voice echoing in her head. "You'll figure it out, Emily. You always do. Just take it one step at a time and remember to trust yourself." The floodgates opened then, and for the first time in months, Emily let herself cry. She had spent so much time hiding behind the walls of her own mind, too afraid to confront the emotions that had been bubbling up. She missed her aunt more than she could ever put into words. But in that moment, the pain didn't feel quite as sharp. There was something comforting about letting herself feel, even if it was overwhelming. When the tears subsided, Emily felt lighter. She wiped her eyes and reached for her phone again, opening the email and accepting the job offer. "I can do this," she told herself. "It's not about being perfect. It's about taking that first step forward." The following Monday, Emily walked into the institution, her heart pounding. She had never felt so nervous in her life. The building was massive, and the staff who passed by all seemed so confident. Emily felt like an imposter in the midst of it all. But she held her head high, reminding herself that she had earned this opportunity. She had worked for it, even if it hadn't always felt like she was moving in the right direction. And then, as she reached the reception desk, she saw him. Marcus West. He was exactly as she remembered, tall, composed, and carrying an air of authority that made him seem both intimidating and inspiring. He looked up from his papers as she approached, and for a split second, Emily froze. He smiled politely but didn't seem to recognize her immediately. "Emily, right?" he said, his voice calm but carrying an undertone of curiosity. Her breath caught in her throat. "Yes, that's me." "I'm glad you decided to join us," he said, offering a handshake. "Welcome aboard. I look forward to working with you." As they shook hands, Emily felt a rush of emotions, nervousness, excitement, fear, and even a little pride. This was it. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment when she would step into her future, even though it was terrifying. The rest of the day passed in a blur of introductions, paperwork, and unfamiliar faces. But despite the overwhelming nature of it all, one thing became clear: Emily was finally where she needed to be. She had taken the first step, and now she had to trust herself to keep moving forward. Later that evening, after a long day, Emily sat in her new apartment, staring at the city lights once more. It still felt vast, still felt intimidating. But it didn't feel quite as lonely as it had before. She was no longer just an observer. She was a part of something now. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The first few weeks at the institution were nothing short of overwhelming for Emily. She had been thrown into the deep end from day one, working on research projects that demanded both intellectual rigor and creativity. She spent long hours analyzing data, preparing reports, and sitting in on meetings with senior researchers. The pace was relentless, and the stakes felt high. But amid the chaos, Emily began to feel something she hadn't in a long time: a sense of purpose. The work was challenging, yes, but it wasn't like the tasks she had done before. Rote assignments meant only to pass the time. This was meaningful. Each report she submitted, Each meeting she attended felt like a small victory, a step closer to something bigger. She was especially surprised by how much she enjoyed working with Marcus. He had a reputation for being intense, and at first, Emily had been intimidated by his authoritative demeanor. But as the days went on, she realized that his tough exterior was just a reflection of his dedication. He wasn't harsh, he was driven. And that drive pushed Emily to be better, to think more critically, and to keep improving, even when it felt like she couldn't possibly do more. One afternoon, Marcus pulled her aside after a meeting. He was standing by the glass wall of the research floor, looking out over the city. Emily couldn't help but feel a little nervous. She had been working closely with him on a particularly difficult project, and while she thought she had done a decent job, she couldn't shake the feeling that her efforts weren't enough. "Emily," he began, his tone measured. "You've been doing great work. I've been watching your progress, and I'm impressed. There's something about the way you approach problems that stands out. It's not just about the numbers or the facts. It's about the way you think outside the box." Emily blinked, unsure if she had heard him correctly. She had expected constructive criticism, not praise. Thank you," she stammered, her throat tight. "I'm just trying to keep up with the team. I didn't think I was doing anything special." Marcus gave her a half-smile. "That's the thing, Emily. You don't need to just keep up. You've got something different, something rare. I see a lot of people in this field who just follow the script. But you've got the ability to innovate. Don't underestimate that." Emily's heart swelled with a mixture of pride and disbelief. Innovation? Me? It was hard to accept. She had spent so much of her life doubting herself, thinking she was just average, just another person trying to get by. But here she was, being acknowledged for her creativity, her unique approach. She realized that Marcus wasn't just seeing her as an assistant, he was seeing her potential. After he left, Emily stood by the window, looking out at the city below. The lights twinkled, just like they had that first night she arrived. But now they didn't seem as cold. Instead, they felt like a reflection of her journey, full of potential, full of possibility. As the weeks passed, Emily began to settle into a routine. Her confidence grew, and so did her friendships at the institution. She found herself eating lunch with colleagues, laughing over small jokes and discussing everything from current research to their favorite books. It was a far cry from the loneliness she had felt when she first arrived. The city didn't feel so isolating anymore. In fact, it was starting to feel like home. One evening, after a long day of work, Emily took a walk through the city to clear her mind. The cold autumn air bit at her cheeks, but it felt invigorating. She walked down familiar streets, passing the cafes and parks she had explored in the first few weeks. Each corner, each building, each face she saw now felt less unfamiliar, less intimidating. It was during this walk that Emily realized something profound. She wasn't just surviving in the city anymore, she was living. She had stopped being a passive observer of her life. Instead, she was an active participant. She was making choices, taking risks, and finding her place in a world that once seemed so overwhelming. She stopped at a bench in a small park and sat down, pulling out her phone. She quickly texted Josh, "I think I'm finally starting to get it." He replied almost immediately, "Told you so. You just had to give it time." Her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Mrs. Patterson, her old high school principal. It had been a while since they had last spoken, but she had kept in touch, always checking in on Emily's progress. "Emily, I just wanted to let you know how proud I am of you. I've been hearing great things about your work in the city, and I knew you had it in you. Sometimes, it takes stepping outside of your comfort zone to really find your strength. Keep going." Tears stung Emily's eyes as she read the message. She had come so far, farther than she had ever thought possible. And the people who had believed in her, even when she didn't believe in herself, had been right all along. For the first time, Emily felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She had no idea where the road ahead would lead, but she was ready for it. She had learned that it wasn't about having all the answers. It was about trusting the process, embracing the unknown, and knowing that every step forward, no matter how small, was a victory in itself. As she stood up from the bench and made her way back to her apartment, Emily felt a quiet pride in her heart. She had faced so many fears, loneliness, uncertainty, the weight of expectations, and had come out stronger on the other side. The city, once a place of fear, had become a canvas where she could paint her future. It wasn't going to be easy, and there would still be challenges ahead, but Emily was no longer afraid. She had learned that the journey wasn't just about finding success. It was about growing, evolving, and embracing every twist and turn along the way. And most importantly, it was about believing in herself. As Emily walked home under the glowing city lights, she couldn't help but smile. The journey had only just begun. The days continued to blur together, and with each passing week, Emily found herself becoming more comfortable in her role at the institution. She was learning at an impressive rate, taking on increasingly complex tasks, and beginning to earn the respect of her colleagues. Her project had gained traction, and Marcus had started to involve her in meetings that used to intimidate her, meetings with senior researchers, and even some top-tier professionals from other institutions. Emily felt like she was finally stepping into her own, and it felt incredible. Yet, despite all her progress, there was still a nagging feeling that she couldn't shake. As much as she had grown, as much as she had accomplished, a small part of her still felt unsettled. There was always that question lingering at the back of her mind. Was this it? Was this the peak of her potential? Was she truly on the path she wanted to be on? Or was she simply following a course because it was the safe option? It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon when the answer came. Emily had just wrapped up a meeting with her team when Marcus approached her desk, a folder in his hand. She straightened up, a little surprised. Marcus had been giving her more responsibility lately, but she hadn't expected him to seek her out so directly. "Emily, I need to talk to you about something," he said, his tone unusually serious. She nodded, her pulse quickening. "Sure, Marcus. What's up?" He sat down across from her, flipping open the folder to reveal a series of documents. "I've been working on a new initiative with some colleagues from other universities, and I think you're the perfect fit for it." Emily leaned forward, intrigued. "What kind of initiative?" "It's a project aimed at advancing some cutting-edge research in the field of cognitive science. It's a big leap, and we're looking for someone with a fresh perspective, someone who's not afraid to challenge the status quo. You've been doing exceptional work here, and I think you could really make an impact." Her heart skipped a beat. Cognitive science? Cutting-edge research? That was exactly the kind of work Emily had dreamed of being part of when she was still in college. She had always been passionate about exploring how the human mind worked, about understanding the depths of cognition and learning. But the project sounded massive, and as far as she could tell, it was also highly competitive. "Do you think I'm ready for something like this?" Emily asked, the self-doubt creeping back into her mind. "I mean, this is a big deal, Marcus. I'm just getting started here." Marcus smiled, his gaze unwavering. "That's exactly why I'm offering this to you. You're not just getting started, Emily. You've shown that you can think outside the box. You're willing to take risks, to approach problems from a new angle. That's exactly what this project needs." Emily's mind raced. This was the kind of opportunity that could change everything. But at the same time, it was a huge step up. The stakes were higher, the expectations greater. She would be working with some of the brightest minds in the field, people who had been in academia far longer than she had. Could she keep up? Could she make a meaningful contribution? "What kind of timeline are we talking about?" she asked, her voice shaky but determined. Marcus handed her a piece of paper with a few dates and deadlines written on it. "We're looking at a pretty intense startup period over the next few months, but we're aiming for some initial results by the end of the year. It's going to be demanding, but if you're up for it, I think you'll thrive in this environment." Emily stared at the paper, her thoughts spinning. She couldn't deny that she wanted this. She wanted to prove to herself that she could handle something this ambitious, this groundbreaking. But she also knew the risk. She had already come so far, and this new opportunity would require everything she had. She would have to stretch herself in ways she never had before. Marcus leaned back in his chair, waiting for her response. "I don't expect you to give me an answer right away, but I wanted you to know that this is on the table. It's a huge opportunity, and I think you're ready for it." Emily took a deep breath, her fingers tracing the edge of the folder in front of her. Could she do it? The truth was, she had no idea. But wasn't that what this entire journey had been about? Stepping into the unknown? Facing her fears? She had already conquered so much, her doubts, her loneliness, the fear of failure. She looked up at Marcus, a fire burning in her chest. This was her chance. "I'm in," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "I want to do it. I'll take the opportunity." Marcus's eyes brightened. "I knew you'd be the right choice. You've got the drive, Emily. Don't doubt yourself. I'll send you the full details later today, and we'll get started right away." As he left her desk, Emily couldn't help but feel a rush of adrenaline. This was it. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the chance to make a real impact in the field she loved. But as her excitement bubbled up, a part of her also felt the weight of what she had just agreed to. The work would be harder. The expectations would be higher. But for the first time, Emily didn't feel afraid. She was ready. She had fought too hard to get here to turn back now. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. Emily spent her nights reading research papers, brushing up on the latest advancements in cognitive science, and refining her approach to the project. She was determined to hit the ground running, but the pressure of her decision began to settle in. Every moment felt like she was standing on the edge of something massive, and the weight of it wasn't always easy to carry. One evening, as she was walking home from work, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Josh. "How's the new project going?" Emily smiled, feeling a wave of gratitude for the people who had supported her along the way. It hadn't been an easy journey, but she wasn't alone. She had friends. She had mentors. And most importantly, she had herself. She typed back, "It's a big challenge, but I'm ready for it. Thanks for believing in me." As she stared at the screen, she couldn't help but feel like she was standing at the precipice of something incredible. The future was hers to shape. Emily had never been more focused in her life. The cognitive science project was a challenge unlike anything she had ever faced before, but the adrenaline of diving into uncharted waters kept her alert and determined. With the support of Marcus and her team, she quickly found her rhythm, though the learning curve was steep. The pace was fast, and the pressure to perform was relentless, but there was something exhilarating about it. Every new discovery, every breakthrough, no matter how small, filled her with a sense of purpose that she hadn't felt in months. The project was ambitious, combining cutting-edge brain imaging techniques with machine learning models to understand how people process and store information. It was at the forefront of both fields, and every day Emily was surrounded by experts who had devoted their careers to this kind of work. It was intimidating, but it also fueled her desire to prove that she belonged here. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of analyzing data, Emily sat at her desk, her eyes blurry from hours of staring at her screen. The office was empty now, save for a few scattered colleagues who were working late, just like her. The soft hum of the computers was the only sound, and the stillness seemed to give the space an almost sacred quality. Emily leaned back in her chair, stretching her arms above her head. She had been stuck on a particular data set for hours, unable to make sense of the patterns that the machine learning algorithms were spitting out. It felt like a dead end, and frustration was starting to gnaw at her. She had been on the verge of calling it a night when something unusual caught her eye on the screen. At first, she thought it was a glitch. The data points she had been analyzing seemed to show a correlation she hadn't anticipated, something that didn't quite make sense based on the current hypothesis. She zoomed in, inspecting it closely, and her heart skipped a beat. There it was again, a pattern that, if verified, could be a game changer. The connection was subtle but undeniable. The data suggested that certain cognitive processes, previously thought to be independent of each other, were actually linked in ways they hadn't imagined. If she could prove it, this insight could provide new pathways for understanding how the brain organizes and processes complex information. It was revolutionary. Emily sat frozen for a moment, the weight of her discovery sinking in. She had found something that could completely shift the direction of the project. The kind of breakthrough that researchers dream about. But then, a wave of panic swept over her. What if she was wrong? What if this was just a mistake? No, she whispered to herself, shaking her head. I can't doubt myself now. She quickly began recalculating the models, rechecking the algorithms, and running additional tests to confirm her theory. It wasn't easy, but the adrenaline was a steady companion, pushing her to stay sharp, to keep going. Hours slipped by unnoticed as she double-checked every detail. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Emily looked at the new results and breathed a sigh of relief. It was real. The data was consistent. She had found something no one else had. With trembling hands, she pulled up Marcus's contact information and sent him an email with the results. There was no time to waste. This was something that needed to be shared immediately. She briefly described her findings, including the implications for the next steps in the project. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment as she debated whether to add anything else. But then she remembered a piece of advice Marcus had given her earlier: trust your instincts. If you believe in something, stand by it. She hit send. The next morning, Emily arrived at the office earlier than usual. Her mind was buzzing, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was on the verge of something monumental. When she walked in, Marcus was already at his desk, his usual coffee cup in hand. "Good morning," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, betraying the nervous excitement inside her. Marcus looked up and smiled. "Morning, Emily. What's the news? Did you send me something last night?" Emily nodded, taking a deep breath. "Yes, I think I've uncovered something significant in the data. I've found a pattern that we didn't anticipate, one that could change the way we understand cognitive processing. If the correlation holds up, it could be a major breakthrough." Marcus's eyebrows raised in surprise. That's fantastic. Let's take a look." Emily pulled up her results on the screen and walked him through her analysis. As she explained the data, she could see his expression shift from curiosity to focus and then to something else, a sense of awe. "This is incredible," Marcus said after a long pause. "You've just uncovered something that could redefine how we look at cognitive processing. If we can validate this with further testing, we'll be able to write a groundbreaking paper. This is exactly the kind of insight we were hoping for." Relief washed over Emily, followed by a rush of pride. She had done it. She had found something worth fighting for, something that could potentially change the entire direction of the research. But as the excitement started to settle, a thought crossed her mind. What now? This discovery could lead to bigger opportunities, higher expectations, more recognition, more responsibility. The pressure was starting to mount, and for a split second, she felt the familiar sting of doubt creeping in. Could she handle all of this? Was she ready for the weight of what this breakthrough could mean for her career? Before she could spiral into uncertainty, Marcus turned to her, a smile on his face. "You've proven something huge here, Emily. But don't rest on your laurels just yet. We have a lot of work ahead of us. We'll need to refine the model, run more tests, and make sure our findings are solid." This is just the beginning. The weight of his words didn't feel as heavy as it once might have. In fact, Emily felt a sense of clarity that surprised her. The pressure was still there, but now it felt like a challenge she was more than capable of taking on. For the first time, she didn't feel alone in this journey. She had a team that supported her, and she had earned her place in the world of research. She wasn't just an observer anymore. She was a key player in a field she was passionate about. And as long as she kept pushing forward, kept believing in herself, there was no limit to what she could accomplish. As the day went on, Emily was flooded with emails and messages from colleagues congratulating her on her findings. She had expected it to feel overwhelming, but instead, she felt a sense of excitement that gave her energy to keep working. That evening, as she sat in her apartment, sipping a cup of tea, Emily reflected on the journey that had led her to this moment. The isolation, the doubts, the challenges, it all felt distant now. She had come so far, and while there was still much ahead of her, for the first time in a long while, she felt like the future was hers for the taking. The next chapter of her life had begun, and she was ready for whatever it might bring. Emily had barely begun to process the weight of her discovery when everything seemed to accelerate. What had started as a quiet breakthrough in a dimly lit office transformed into a whirlwind of activity. Researchers from other institutions started reaching out to her, curious about her findings and eager to collaborate. A few even suggested flying her out to present her results at conferences, an invitation she never would have imagined a month ago. But the more the recognition grew, the more Emily felt the pressure mounting. The excitement was undeniable, but so was the looming sense of responsibility. This wasn't just about uncovering something groundbreaking anymore. It was about proving herself worthy of the attention, the recognition, and the expectations that came with it. She felt like she was constantly racing to stay ahead of the curve, trying to keep up with the people around her who were, in her mind, always a step ahead. One Thursday afternoon, as Emily sat in the research lab reviewing new data from their follow-up tests, her phone buzzed on the desk. It was a message from Marcus. "Can you meet me in the conference room in 10? We need to talk about the next steps." Her heart skipped. While she had been expecting updates and new directions, the urgency in his message felt different. She quickly closed her laptop and walked down the long hallway to the conference room, trying to shake the feeling of anxiety that had been growing inside her. When she entered, Marcus was already seated at the table, a few other senior researchers from the project sitting around him. Emily's stomach tightened. There was a formality to the scene that made her nervous. She had never been in a meeting like this before. "Sit down, Emily," Marcus said, his voice calm but serious. Emily took a seat, trying to control the fluttering in her chest. She had been through so many milestones already, but this felt different. The stakes were higher now. "Emily," Marcus began, his gaze fixed on her, "your findings have generated significant interest. In fact, they're bigger than we anticipated. But with that comes a responsibility. We've had discussions with several institutions who want to partner with us. They believe your discovery could change the field." Emily nodded, trying to absorb his words. That's great," she said, though she didn't feel entirely convinced. Something in her gut told her there was more to the conversation. Marcus paused for a moment, choosing his next words carefully. "There's also a more difficult decision ahead. We're being approached by a major publishing journal to fast-track our paper. They want us to present your findings at an international conference in Berlin next month." Emily blinked, stunned. Berlin? International conference? She hadn't even begun to think about presenting her work to such a wide audience. It was one thing to share results with her team, but this? It felt like an entirely new ballgame. "Don't get me wrong, Emily. This is an incredible opportunity, one that could change the trajectory of your career," Marcus continued. "But with the opportunity comes scrutiny. This level of exposure will put your work under a microscope. People will challenge your findings, look for flaws, and expect perfection. Are you ready for that kind of pressure?" The question hung in the air. Emily wanted to say yes, to jump at the opportunity. But the truth was, she wasn't sure. She had been so focused on the thrill of discovery that she hadn't stopped to consider the weight of the expectations that came with it. Was she ready to stand in front of the world and defend her work? What if they didn't agree with her findings? What if she faltered? Before she could respond, another researcher, Dr. Laura Gray, spoke up. The pressure is real, Emily. But it's also a chance to make a lasting impact. This is how you become a leader in your field. We believe you can handle it, but it's important to be honest with yourself about whether you're ready for the spotlight. Emily took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of thoughts swirling in her mind. She had always believed that success came from taking risks, from embracing the challenges that pushed you beyond your limits. But now, faced with this enormous opportunity, she wasn't so sure. The silence in the room stretched for what felt like an eternity. She glanced at Marcus, who was watching her closely. The look in his eyes was not one of pressure, but of support. He wasn't pushing her, he was waiting for her to find her own answer. I need a moment, Emily said quietly, standing up. I need to think. She left the conference room without looking back, her heart racing. She walked down the hall, her mind in a whirl. The thought of presenting in Berlin, of being on that international stage, terrified her. She had always dreamed of moments like this, but now that it was real, it felt like a burden. Emily found herself outside the building, standing in the cool air of the evening, her hands shoved deep into her pockets. The city had never felt so vast, so overwhelming. The towering buildings, the constant hum of traffic, it all seemed so distant and cold now. It was as if the world had suddenly grown too big for her to navigate. She thought back to the quiet evenings in her small apartment when she had first arrived in the city, when it had felt like the world was too much to handle. But she had made it this far, hadn't she? She had found her voice, discovered something worth pursuing. She had learned to fight through the doubts and fears that had held her back before. But now she was at a crossroads. The fear of failure was gnawing at her, threatening to undo all the progress she had made. If she accepted this opportunity, she would be exposing herself to a level of scrutiny she wasn't sure she could endure. If she turned it down, would she regret it forever? Would she always wonder what could have been? Just as she was about to sink into her thoughts, her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a text from Josh. How's everything going with the research? You still feeling good about it? Emily smiled at the simplicity of his message. Josh didn't know the magnitude of what she was facing, but his words reminded her of why she had started this journey in the first place. It wasn't about the recognition. It wasn't about the accolades. It was about the work. About making a difference. About pushing the boundaries of what was possible. She took a deep breath and typed back, I'm scared. But I think I'm ready. I'm going for it. She hit send, feeling a sense of resolve settle over her. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she was no longer afraid to take the next step. Berlin. The name alone was enough to make Emily's heart race. She had never been to Europe before, and now here she was, standing in front of a glass and steel skyscraper that housed one of the most prestigious scientific conferences in the world. The sense of being out of her depth crept up on her like a shadow. But she had made her decision, hadn't she? She had chosen to embrace the challenge, to step into the spotlight and show the world that she was ready for what came next. Emily could hear the hum of voices as she walked through the bustling lobby of the convention center. Researchers from all corners of the world mingled and networked, exchanging stories and theories. It was exhilarating and intimidating all at once. She had spent countless hours on her research, fine-tuning her findings, preparing her presentation. But no amount of preparation could quiet the nerves that twisted inside her as she looked around at the faces of some of the most respected minds in the field. Emily. A voice cut through her thoughts. She turned to find Marcus approaching, his usual calm demeanor giving her a sense of comfort. He smiled warmly as he offered her a handshake. How's it going? I'm good, Emily replied, though her voice cracked slightly. betraying her nerves. I think. Marcus laughed. You're going to do great. Trust me. You've earned this moment. Emily nodded, though the doubt still lingered. She could hear the buzz of conversation around her, but she was fixated on the massive stage at the center of the room. The conference hall was grand, the walls lined with towering screens displaying groundbreaking research from across the globe. And then there was her presentation, her moment. It was surreal. This wasn't just a small academic meeting anymore. This was a chance to share her work with the world. Marcus seemed to sense her unease and placed a hand on her shoulder. Listen, you've got this. You've been preparing for this your whole life. Just stay true to your work. Let the data speak for itself. Emily took a deep breath. I'll try. What if they don't believe me? What if someone finds a flaw in my work? There will always be critics, Marcus said, his voice steady and reassuring. But that's part of the process. You'll be fine. Just remember why you started. You're not doing this for anyone else. You're doing it because you believe in the science. Emily nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. She had always known that research wasn't about gaining approval. It was about uncovering the truth, no matter how uncomfortable or inconvenient it might be. And this was the truth she had found. She couldn't let fear take it away from her now. As the time for her presentation drew near, Emily found herself backstage, pacing nervously. Her slides were set, her notes were ready, but the knot in her stomach refused to loosen. She could hear the low murmur of the audience on the other side of the curtain. The moment was coming. Her hands were clammy as she gripped the podium in front of her. A voice came over the intercom. Up next, Dr. Emily Carter, with her groundbreaking research on cognitive processing and machine learning. Please welcome her to the stage. It was her name. It was real. She was about to step onto the stage and present her work to the world. She inhaled deeply, trying to steady her racing heart. She could do this. She had to. The spotlight hit her as she stepped onto the stage, blinding at first, but it quickly faded as she focused on the audience in front of her. The room was filled with hundreds of faces, some of them familiar, most of them strangers, but all of them watching her with anticipation. Her nerves almost overtook her, but she took another deep breath, remembering what Marcus had said. Let the data speak for itself. She began. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Emily Carter, and today I'm here to present a study that explores a new understanding of cognitive processing through the lens of machine learning. My team and I have uncovered an unexpected pattern in the way the brain processes and stores information, a pattern that challenges long-held assumptions in our field. Today, I want to share that with you. Her voice was steady, though she could feel the sweat gathering at the back of her neck. She moved through the slides, explaining her methodology, her findings, and the implications of her discovery. She spoke clearly, confidently, but each moment felt like a battle between her desire to convince the audience and the fear that they might find a flaw in her work. As the presentation drew to a close, Emily felt a surge of relief. She had made it through. But then, the questions began. The first question came from an older researcher in the front row. Dr. Carter, your findings are intriguing, but there's a fundamental issue with your methodology. You rely heavily on machine learning models, but there's no consideration for the underlying biases in the data. How can you be sure that your results aren't skewed by these biases? Emily's heart sank. She had expected questions, but this one hit harder than she anticipated. The implications of this critique could undermine her entire project. She could feel her palms growing sweaty as she paused, trying to gather her thoughts. Stay calm, she reminded herself. Thank you for the question, she began, her voice more composed than she felt. I understand the concern, and I've taken that into account. In fact, we've run multiple iterations of the models, and each time, the correlation I found remained consistent, even when we controlled for potential biases. However, I do agree that this is an area for further exploration, and I'm currently working on refining the data inputs to ensure greater accuracy. The room fell silent for a moment. She could see the other researchers nodding, impressed by her response. It wasn't a perfect answer, but it was honest, and it showed that she had anticipated the question. Her confidence grew slightly, though she still felt the weight of the scrutiny. Another question came from a young researcher in the back. Dr. Carter, do you think that your findings could have broader implications outside the realm of cognitive science? Could your work have applications in fields like artificial intelligence or neurotechnology? Emily took a moment to think. This was the kind of question she loved, one that asked her to think beyond the immediate implications of her work, to imagine how it could ripple out into other areas. Absolutely, she said, her confidence growing. If the patterns I've discovered hold up, they could be applied to fields like AI and neurotechnology, where understanding how the brain organizes information is crucial. In fact, one of the reasons I'm so passionate about this research is its potential to bridge the gap between neuroscience and technology. The possibilities are exciting. The room responded with a murmur of approval. Emily allowed herself a small smile. She was starting to find her footing. As the questions continued, Emily found herself in a rhythm. The fear that had plagued her earlier faded as she engaged with the audience. She was no longer standing alone in front of a sea of unknown faces. She was part of a conversation, a dialogue about the future of science. And when her time was up and the questions were finally over, the applause that followed was louder than she had expected. She had done it. She had faced her fear, stood in front of the brightest minds in the field, and defended her work. The world had seen her truth. Later that evening, as Emily stood outside the conference hall, the cool Berlin air washing over her, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She had faced the spotlight and had come out on top. It was only the beginning, she knew, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was truly in control of her own future. She had taken the leap, and it felt like everything was about to change. The flight back from Berlin felt surreal. Emily sat by the window, watching as the clouds passed beneath the plane. Her mind kept replaying the events of the past week, the overwhelming crowds, the thunderous applause after her presentation, the praise from her peers. It was all still a blur, like a dream she had yet to fully grasp. She had never imagined it would feel like this. She had imagined the excitement, the thrill of being recognized, but there was an undercurrent of something she couldn't shake. A quiet unease, a feeling that things weren't as they seemed. Her phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. It was a message from Josh. "Hey, how was it? You killed it, right?" Emily smiled at the text, but there was no denying the exhaustion in her bones. Her fingers hovered over the keys as she typed a reply. "It went well. Better than I expected. But I'm a little overwhelmed." Her phone dinged almost immediately with a follow-up text. "That's awesome. You deserve it. Let me know when you're back. Let's catch up." She paused for a moment, feeling the weight of the past few days crash down on her. She had been so focused on the presentation that she hadn't even stopped to consider what came next. What now? She had just launched herself into the global scientific community. There was no turning back. As the plane touched down and taxied to the gate, Emily's stomach twisted with a mix of excitement and dread. She had gone from being a relatively unknown researcher to a person with international recognition. The world had seen her. And while that had been exhilarating, it was also terrifying. The moment she stepped off the plane and entered the airport terminal, Emily was greeted by a barrage of emails, messages, and notifications. A wave of discomfort washed over her as she glanced at the screen. It wasn't just congratulatory messages. There were questions, difficult ones, doubts, requests for clarification. A few were from researchers she had never met, reaching out with critiques or suggestions. But there was one message that stood out. It was from Dr. Laura Gray, the senior researcher who had been following Emily's work closely. The subject line read, "Urgent. Request for immediate discussion." Emily's heart skipped. She opened the email quickly, bracing herself. "Emily, I hope you're doing well after the conference. There's something we need to discuss regarding your presentation. It seems that some elements of your work have come under scrutiny. A few colleagues have raised concerns about the reliability of the data, and we need to address these issues before moving forward. Please reach out as soon as you can. Best, Laura Gray." Emily read the message twice, her mind racing. Concerns? Scrutiny? After everything that had happened in Berlin, she hadn't expected this. Wasn't the presentation a success? The applause. The recognition. Why now? Her hands trembled as she typed out a quick reply. "Of course, I'll be in touch as soon as I get back to the office." She closed the email and leaned back in her seat, letting out a long, slow breath. For the first time in days, doubt began to creep in. Had she missed something? Had she been so focused on proving herself that she had overlooked something critical in her research? The next morning, after a restless night of sleep, Emily walked into her office at the research center. She could feel the weight of the messages from her colleagues bearing down on her. Marcus was already there, sitting at his desk, his face serious as he looked up from his papers. "Good morning," he said, though his tone lacked its usual warmth. "How was Berlin?" "It went well," Emily replied, trying to maintain her composure. "But there's something going on. Dr. Gray just sent me an email about some concerns regarding my presentation. I thought everything went smoothly. Did I miss something?" Marcus didn't respond immediately. Instead, he motioned for her to sit down. "Emily," he began, his voice low, "there's something you need to understand. The research you presented, your findings, they're groundbreaking. But there's also a lot of attention on you right now. And not all of it is positive." Emily felt her stomach tighten. "What do you mean?" "The data you presented is being questioned by some people in the field," Marcus said, his gaze steady. "You've broken new ground, but there are concerns that your analysis didn't account for certain variables. You're being pushed into the spotlight now, and with that comes the inevitable backlash." Emily blinked, processing his words. "So you think they're right? That I made a mistake?" "I don't know," Marcus replied, leaning forward. "I think you need to take a step back and reassess. Look at your work from a different angle. These people who are questioning you, they're some of the most respected in the field. You can't afford to ignore their concerns." Her mind raced. Emily had always prided herself on her attention to detail, her meticulous approach to research. But now, the weight of the scrutiny was beginning to feel suffocating. How had she missed something? Was it really there? Or was this just a case of jealousy, of people wanting to discredit her because she had stepped into the spotlight too quickly? "I don't know if I can do this," Emily said softly, more to herself than to Marcus. Marcus's expression softened. "You're going to have to, Emily. You're at a crossroads right now. What you do next will define your career." She felt a lump form in her throat. The pressure had been building for so long, but now it felt unbearable. The dream she had fought for, the moment she had worked so hard for, it was slipping through her fingers. "You're not alone in this," Marcus added, his voice sincere. "We'll work through it together. But you need to take action. You need to show everyone that you believe in your work and that you're not afraid to stand by it, even when it's difficult." Emily nodded, though doubt still gnawed at her. Was she truly ready for this? For the pressure, the criticism, the potential failure? She had never been tested like this before. That evening, as Emily sat in front of her laptop, reviewing her data once again, she made a decision. She wouldn't back down. This was her research, her truth. She would take the feedback, learn from it, and prove that she was more than capable of defending her work. The world had seen her. Now it was time to show them who she really was. The following weeks were a whirlwind for Emily. She had thought the hardest part was behind her, the international recognition, the overwhelming response, the applause from the conference. But that had only been the beginning. The real challenge came when the dust began to settle and the questions started to pile up. Her work, hailed as groundbreaking, was now under intense scrutiny. Some critiques were constructive, but others felt like targeted attacks, questioning her methodology, the integrity of her data, and even her motives. She'd spent countless nights combing through her research again, every figure, every calculation. Had she missed something? Had her eagerness to present the results clouded her judgment? But the more she revisited the data, the more confident she became in her findings. There was no flaw, no hidden error, no gap that needed to be filled. Yet, as the pressure mounted, so did the doubt. Emily had always believed that truth would prevail. It was her mantra. But truth, she now realized, didn't always protect you from the consequences of standing by it. Her office at the research center had become a war room. Every day, Marcus and a handful of trusted colleagues gathered to go over the criticisms, analyze them one by one, and prepare counterarguments. But each day felt like a battle. Every time they thought they had answered one question, another appeared, larger, more complex, and more damning. It was hard not to feel alone in those moments. The world had celebrated her, but now that same world seemed to be slowly turning against her. In private moments, she wondered if the critics were right. Had she been too eager? Too blinded by ambition? Had she jumped too quickly into the spotlight, unaware of the shadows lurking behind her research? One afternoon, as she sat in her office alone, staring at the open laptop screen, a message appeared. "We need to talk. Laura." Her heart sank. Laura Gray, the senior researcher who had emailed her earlier, was someone Emily had always admired. She had been a guiding figure in the academic community, her expertise unmatched. But lately, Emily had felt a growing distance from her. The emails had become less encouraging, more formal. The criticism was starting to feel personal, and Emily didn't know what to make of it. She took a deep breath and typed a response. "I'll be there in an hour." The walk to Lara's office felt like a journey to the gallows. Emily's mind raced with questions, each one more unsettling than the last. What was Lara going to say? Had she reached the same conclusion as the others, that Emily's work was flawed? That everything she had fought for had been in vain? When she arrived at Lara's office, the door was slightly ajar. Emily knocked softly, and a moment later, Lara gestured for her to enter. "Emily," Lara said, her voice neutral, but there was something in her eyes that made Emily uneasy. "Come in. Sit down." Emily took a seat across from her, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She tried to calm her racing heart, but the tension in the air was palpable. "I wanted to talk to you about the recent concerns raised regarding your research," Lara began, her gaze unwavering. "You've received a lot of attention, as expected, but there's more going on behind the scenes. A lot of people are questioning your methodology, your conclusions. They're not just critiques, they're concerns about the integrity of your work." Emily's pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" "I've reviewed everything. There's no flaw in my analysis." Lara's expression softened slightly, but her words remained firm. "I don't doubt your ability, Emily. But when you're thrust into the spotlight like this, the scrutiny becomes intense. People will look for mistakes, no matter how small. They'll try to tear down your work because they feel threatened by it." Emily's mind reeled. "But what if they're right? What if I missed something?" "No," Lara said, leaning forward. "You've done the right thing. Don't let the noise distract you. I've been in this field long enough to know that criticism is a part of the process. But that doesn't mean you should let it define you." Emily felt a rush of relief at her words. She had feared that Lara might side with the critics, that her mentor might abandon her when the going got tough. But instead, Lara had a different perspective, a perspective Emily hadn't fully considered. "I'm not saying you don't need to make adjustments," Lara continued, her voice steady. "But I believe in your research, Emily. It's groundbreaking. You have something important here. But it's not just about the data, it's about how you handle this moment." Emily looked at Lara, her eyes wide. What do you mean? Don't apologize for your work, Lara said firmly. Don't back down. Stand by your truth. If you believe in it, then let the world know. But you can't let the pressure change you. This is your moment, and you have to own it. Show them you're not afraid to defend it. A surge of determination filled Emily as Lara's words sank in. She had spent so much time doubting herself, wondering if she had made a mistake. But this was what she had worked for, the chance to make a real difference, to push the boundaries of science. She couldn't let fear define her. She couldn't let the critics win. That evening, Emily stood in front of her laptop, drafting a public statement. She knew it was risky. It wasn't just about defending her research. It was about standing up for herself, for the work she believed in, and for the truth she had uncovered. This was no longer just about science. It was about who she was as a person, as a researcher. She took a deep breath and typed. To the scientific community, colleagues, and peers, as I continue to receive feedback on my recent research, I want to take this opportunity to address the concerns that have been raised. I acknowledge the importance of rigorous debate and welcome constructive criticism. It is a vital part of scientific progress. However, I stand by the integrity of my work. My findings, based on extensive analysis and validation, are solid. I believe that we must embrace new ideas, even when they challenge long-held assumptions. The road to discovery is not always easy, and it is through collaboration and dialogue that we can refine our understanding. I invite further discussion and scrutiny, as I am confident that the data I have presented will withstand the test of time. Thank you for your continued support, and I look forward to the next steps in this journey. Sincerely, Dr. Emily Carter. She hit send, her fingers trembling. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. She wasn't backing down. This was her moment to take ownership of her truth, no matter the outcome. The next day, her inbox was flooded with responses. Some were supportive, others critical, but there was one message that stood out. It was from Dr. Lara Gray. Emily, I read your statement. You're on the right path. I'm proud of you. Now let's move forward. There's still so much work to do, and I'm with you every step of the way. The weight that had been pressing down on Emily seemed to lift, just a little. She was no longer alone in this fight. She had chosen to stand by her work, to defend it with everything she had. And no matter what came next, she knew she had made the right choice. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?